Welcome to part 8 and the last part of this tutorial series on how to create this sci-fi worker robot in Blender. So this is the last part, and in this part we are going to be doing the animation. So we will be animating the robot and then rendering out the frames, and then in Blender's video editor we will composite the final animation. So let's jump right into it and do the animation. So to do the animation I'm going to need a timeline, and I closed my timeline. So what I'm going to do is move my mouse right down here, and when the crosshair appears, I can click and drag up, and that's going to add the timeline. And then we need to change this to a timeline, so I'm going to click right over here, and then I can just change this to the timeline right here under animation, timeline. So we can use this to do the animation. Now I want my animation to be about 400 frames long, so on the end frame right here, I'm just going to change this to 400, just like that, so we now have 400 frames. And then as I talked about earlier in the tutorial series, I will be using Eevee to do this because Eevee renders much faster, and I do think it looks pretty nice, but you could totally do this in Cycles. It looks fine in Cycles as well, but Eevee will render much faster, so I'll be doing this in Eevee. So now what I want to do is I want to change the camera's aspect ratio, because if you select the camera and go right over here to the output properties, you can see that this is a square image. So I want to change this just to a 1080p image. So on the resolution X, I'm going to type in 1920. And then on the Y, I'm going to type in 1080. So that is just the standard 1080p, 1920 by 1080. Now I have a 2K resolution monitor, so it's double 1080p, and also that's how I film my videos and post my videos. So I'm going to render this out at double the resolution so that it's a 2K image instead of a 1080p image. So right here on the resolution, I'm going to change the percentage to 200. So that's going to double the size. Now you totally don't have to do that. If you double the size, that will make it take a little bit longer to render, but this is with Eevee, and I do have a pretty powerful computer, and so this 2K image, let's just wait for this to load up, and that rendered really fast in less than 4 seconds. So I'll just press escape to go out of that. So you could just render this at 1080p, I'll be rendering at 2K. Now the camera is too close right now, so to bring it out, I'm going to make sure the camera is selected, and then I'm going to press G to grab, and then I'm going to tap the Z key twice, and then I can bring the camera out so that I can see the entire robot. Then I'm also going to double tap the R key, and that's going to use the trackball rotation, and I'm just going to rotate it over. All right, so now let's start the animation. So I'm going to select the main object right here. This is the main controller object. I'll press G to grab, and I'll bring it back on the y-axis, and I'm going to bring it all the way back here till we can't see it. And also I'm going to select the camera and go to the camera settings, and right here on this setting in the viewport display, I'm just going to turn this way down so that I can see what the camera can't see, so whatever is out of the camera view. And I'll just bring this back to about there. And then I'm also going to go to frame 0, or I'm actually going to go to frame 1, so just make sure you are on frame 1. And now to automatically add keyframes, I'm going to turn on this button right here, and this is the auto key. So this way, whenever you transform an object, rotate it or scale it or move it, it's automatically going to add a keyframe. So let's get started now with the animation. So I'm just going to press G to grab and then click right there. And you can see on the timeline, it's automatically added a keyframe right there. So I'm now going to move over to about frame 80. So I'm going to move to frame 80, then I'll press G to grab. We'll bring it over on the y-axis, and I'm going to bring the robot to about here. So now if you go back, you can see the robot is moving forward. And I'm pressing the space bar to play the animation, or you can also click on the play button and pause button right there. Now this doesn't look very realistic because the robot doesn't move at all, and so to make it more realistic, I'm going to have the robot kind of crouched over when he's moving, and then as he slows down, his body's kind of move back a bit. So I'm going to go back to frame 1, and then I'm going to move over to the robot. So I'm going to press the period on the numpad to zoom over to it, and I'm going to rotate this down. So I'm going to rotate the body down so that he's looking more forward. And then also I'm going to select this, and I'm going to rotate it up so that he's looking a bit more up. And then also this neck piece right here, I don't want it to be rotated at all. So I'm going to press Alt R, and that is going to clear the rotation. And then let's also go into solid view by pressing Z, moving your mouse over and letting go to go back into the solid view. Now I also want to move his arms in a bit, because when he's moving really fast, it would kind of make sense his arms are kind of moved in a bit, kind of closer to his body. So I'm just going to rotate these and make sure you're on frame 1, and I'm just going to rotate his hands in a bit. And then also I'm going to close his claws. So I'm just selecting the objects, pressing R to rotate, and I'm just going to move his hands in, move this up, and bring his claws in and together a little bit. And then I think I'll rotate this down a little bit more, and also maybe rotate his head up just a little. And also rotate his head down a little bit more. I don't want it to be up that much. So something like that. So that's going to be the first pose. Let's go back into the camera view, and now I'm going to play the animation, and we'll just watch this till it reaches the end. So he stops at about frame 80. Now you can see that the robot starts to slow down before he hits frame 80. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to make the robot kind of stand up a little bit more as he slows down. So I'm going to go to frame 50, and I'm going to select this object. I'll press R to rotate and then just click to place that. And that's going to add a keyframe. And you can see there's these big lines here. And that is telling us that nothing has changed between both of these keyframes. So these keyframes are pretty much the same exact thing. I'm now going to move to frame 80. Let's move over to frame 80. And I'm going to rotate his whole body up. And then I want to do the same thing for this object. So I'm going to move to about frame 50. And I'm going to just press R to rotate and then click to place that to add a keyframe. And because we have the auto key on, it's automatically adding keyframes. Then I can move to frame 80 and we're going to rotate his head up a little bit. So now if you play through this, you can see that as he starts to slow down, he kind of moves up. And then I'm going to go back to frame 80 and I'm going to select his body and I'm going to rotate his body up a bit more. And I'm actually going to have his body kind of rotating back a little bit. So let's just play through that. So now his body kind of rotates all the way back and a little bit farther. Then I'm going to move to frame 90 and I want his body to kind of rotate back to the normal position. So once I'm on frame 90, I'm going to press Alt R and that is going to clear the rotation. So now he's just back to his original position. So if we play through that, you can see he moves up and then he just kind of moves back. Now, if I play through this, you can see that he kind of just stops right here and then rotates over, and it doesn't look that smooth. So to make it more smooth, I'm going to click right here and I'm going to select these keyframes. I'm now going to press G to grab, and I'm going to move these back to about frame 70. That way, if I play through this, he kind of rotates back, and then by the time he stops, he's already rotating over a little bit. So that looks a lot better. And then I'm also going to go to frame 90 and I'm going to select the head rotation and I'm going to rotate this down a little bit. So that way his head is going to kind of rotate down a little. And then the same thing is kind of happening where it looks a little bit jagged. So on the head rotation, I'm going to select these keyframes on frame 80 and I'm just going to move them back to about frame 70. So now if you play through that, you can see it looks a bit more smooth. And then I want to make the arms more realistic as well, because right now the arms are super stiff. And if you're moving around really fast, your arms are going to kind of move a little bit because your arms are going to be pulled along with your body. So I want the robot's arms to be pulled along when the body moves. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to move to around frame 50 when he's still crouched down. And I'm going to make sure these are rotated pretty far back. So this object is going to have a keyframe. And then also this object is going to have a keyframe as well. Then I'm going to play the animation and I'm going to move to frame 80. And because his body kind of moves up, I want the hands to be pulled back a little bit. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to rotate it back just like that. And then go over here and I'm going to select this arm as well and rotate that back. So now, as he starts to look up, let me just move over here. We'll play this. As he kind of moves up, you can see that his hands kind of move back. And then also something that I thought of, I don't really need to see the lights and cam. They're just kind of in the way. There's just all these lines here. So up here on the collections, I'm going to click on this button and that's going to hide the lights and the camera. And also we can select this object. And I'm going to also shift select this object and I want to put these objects in the lights and cam collection. So just press M to move them and I'm going to click on lights and cam. All right, so now they're hidden and we can kind of see the robot a lot better. So just that small arm movement really helps to make it look more realistic because the momentum of his body is kind of pushing his hands back. So let's do the same thing, but for the lower arms. So I'm going to move to about frame 50. I'm going to move the arms up, add a keyframe there, select this one and move it up a little bit to add a keyframe there. I'm now going to move to frame 80. Let's move over here. And I want the arms to be pulled down a little bit. So we're going to move both of these arms down. So now if you play through this, take a look at the arms, you can see they just kind of move back. And I'm actually going to move this keyframe over so that it's moved down quicker. So just select the keyframe and move it back a little bit. Let's take a look at that. And then I want to do the same thing for this one here. So I'll select this arm. Let's click on this. We're going to move it over to frame 70 and then we'll play through that. All right, so now his arms kind of move down. So now let's move to frame 90 and I want his head just to look slightly over this way. So I'm going to select this object right here and I first just want to move over to about here and I'm going to press R to rotate and then click to place it. And you can see it's not rotating at all. But now I'm going to go to frame 90 and I'm going to rotate this, and I'm just going to rotate it a tiny bit. So as he kind of stops, his head just slightly looks over this way. Now I'm going to move to frame 115, and I want his whole body to kind of rotate, and I want his head to look over because he's kind of looking over to see what might be over here. So I'm going to press R to rotate. We're going to rotate the head over just like that. And then I'm also going to select the main object right here, and I'm going to move to about frame 95. And then I'm going to press R to rotate, just click to place that, and we're not going to move it at all. And then I'm going to move to frame 115. So if you click back on this object, you can see the keyframe was at 115. So if I select this object, I also want this to rotate and end at 115. So I'll press R to rotate. We're going to rotate it on the Z axis, and I'm just going to rotate it over. Now I think he turns a little bit too fast, so I'm going to select this keyframe, and I'm going to move it over to maybe frame 120. So that looks a little bit better. Now, as he's looking over, his head is also going to look down. So I'm going to move to frame 115, and then I'm going to select this one here, the head rotation, and I'm just going to rotate that down so he's kind of looking down and over. So now he just kind of looks to the side, then looks down and over. Let's press Ctrl S again to save our project. Now we also need to animate the hands as well. So he quickly moves over to the side, and so because of that, his arms are kind of going to move slightly over this way because the arms are being pulled along by the body. So I'm just going to select these arms, and I want to add some keyframes. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit, add a keyframe here, select this, rotate this, add a keyframe there. And then let's also select this. I can just press R and then click to add a keyframe there, select this one, and I'll press R and click to add a keyframe there. So I'm now going to move to a frame 120, and I'm going to rotate this a little bit. And also I'm going to rotate this forward just slightly. And then this one right here, I'm going to rotate this one up just slightly. And then I will take this and I'll rotate it over a bit. And then if I go back here to frame 91, it looks like I need to rotate this over a little bit. So now as he rotates, his arms are going to move over a little bit. Now I want him to start moving a little bit sooner. So I'm going to select the main object right here, and I'm going to see when he starts to rotate. So I'm going to select these keyframes right here on frame 95, and I'm going to move them back a little bit just so that he starts turning a little bit sooner. And then let's move to frame 125, and I just want to move the arms back a little bit, kind of as if they're just kind of resting down. So I'm just going to rotate the arms down a little bit. And then if you select this object right here, you can see that these keyframes are really close to each other, so his arm moves really fast, and I don't really want that. So I'm going to select this keyframe, and I'll press G to grab and move this over. That way his arm's going to move down a bit slower. And also I can select this keyframe and move it out a little bit, and just play through that and see how that's looking. And then I'm also going to press B for the box select, and I'm going to select all these keyframes, and I'll just move them back a little bit just because they need to be moved back a little. So that looks much better. And also I'll bring this one forward a little bit. So you can see now as he rotates, his arm just moves up slightly. Now at about frame 140, I want him to just be looking up a little bit more. So I'm going to select this object, and I'm going to press R to rotate. And then I'm also going to select this object, and I'll press R to rotate and rotate that over. So now he just kind of looks down, and then he kind of looks up. So now let's move over to about frame 180, and I'm now going to make him look way over here. So maybe he heard something in the hallway, and he's looking over pretty quickly. So I'll press R to rotate. We're going to rotate his neck around so he's looking this way. And then I also want him to be looking up a bit. So I'm going to select this circular one. We're going to rotate that up so he's kind of looking up more. And then I also want his body to rotate over just a little. So I'll press R to rotate. We're going to rotate it on the Z axis and just rotate that body a little bit. And then I do think that's a little bit slow, so I'm going to move these all over to 165 instead of 180. So I'm just going to select this keyframe. I'll move it back a little bit, and then let's select the neck. Select this keyframe. Let's rotate it back a little bit. Just see how that's looking. So that's a little bit better. So it's a bit faster. And then we can also select the head rotation and move that back just a little bit. So just select this keyframe, press G to grab, and move it back a little bit. So now let's go to frame 175. And I want his hands to just go down a little bit and kind of relax a little bit. So I'm going to select this, and I will press R to rotate. We're going to rotate that down. Select this one, we'll rotate that down, and then we could also rotate this one up just slightly, rotate that up just slightly. We'd also maybe open up his claws just a little. So I'll open up his claws just a little bit. And then let's move back to about frame 100, and we can kind of move these back to how they were to add more keyframes. So I'll close his claws a little bit. We can rotate this up and close his claws just a little. So now there's just a little bit of movement as he kind of moves. So now I want his body to rotate from about 170 to 200. So I'm going to select the main controller, and you can see we've added a frame here at 165. So from 165 to 200, I just want his body to rotate a bit, but I don't want his head to rotate, so I want his head to stay looking up here. So I'm going to move to frame 200, and then I can rotate this, so R to rotate on the Z-axis, and I'm going to rotate it over like that. All right, so I'll now move back, and I'm just going to select the head rotation, and we've added a keyframe right there. So I'm now going to move to frame 200, and I'm going to rotate this back. So I'll rotate it back just like that. So now if you move the timeline, you can see that his head doesn't really move, but his body does move. So he's rotating his body, but he's still looking in a fixed position. Let's press Ctrl S again to save. And then I also want his head just to rotate down a little bit. So I'm going to move to about 200 frames, and then I'll rotate his head down just a little. So now I want him to look down and kind of examine his hands until about 260. So I'm going to move to 260, and I can now press R to rotate. We'll rotate that down. We can also select this right here, and I'll rotate that over so he's kind of looking at this hand, and then we can also move his hand up. So I'm going to move to frame 210, and I'm just going to add some keyframes on his hands and his arms. So I'll press R and then click to add a keyframe on that object, and I'm going to press R, add a keyframe on that object, and we're just going to add keyframes on all the objects. So you can just select the object, press R, and then just click, and that's going to add a keyframe. So we're just going to add keyframes to all of these arm objects. You can even rotate these a little bit, maybe rotate that up a little bit, and rotate the claws. So I'm now going to move over to about frame 235. So I want his hand to kind of rotate up now as if he's looking at his hand. So I'm going to select this arm, and I'll press R to rotate. Move that up. I can also select this one, and I'll rotate that over a little bit so he's kind of rotating his hand closer, and then I can rotate this up as well. And then I also want his claw to open, so I'm going to select the claws and kind of rotate them open. So now you can see he's kind of rotating his hand up and looking at his hand. Now his head is moving a little bit too slow, so I'm going to select the head rotation, and you can see it's all the way out here at 260. So I'm going to select that keyframe, and I'll move it back a little bit, and then you can just play this and try to get the timing right. So I want his head to move pretty fast. And then I'll move back to frame 260, and I'm just going to rotate that up a little bit. So let's see how that's looking. So now his head just kind of rotates up just a little. And then I also want to make his hand kind of always moving because his hand wouldn't be perfectly still. So I'm going to move to about frame 265, and I'm just going to select the arm, and I'm just going to make his arm move down a little bit. And I will move this one down a little bit, and then I can also close his claw hands. So I will move that down. So now if you play through that, you can see it kind of moves his hand up, and then he just kind of moves his hand down. And I want his hand to be moving down a little bit more. So I'm now going to move to like 180, and I'll rotate that down so that his hand is kind of rotating back down, or his arm is rotating back down. So let's play through that. Let's see how that's looking. So he kind of looks up, and then his hand just kind of moves down. And then we also need to animate his other arm because his other arm is not moving at all. So let's just move over to about 240. We're going to rotate this up, and then we can also rotate this down, maybe open up his hand a little bit. So he kind of moves his hand up, and then let's move to about 270, and I can just kind of relax his arm. So I'll move it down a little bit and maybe close the hand a little. So let's just play through that, see how that's looking. And we could also rotate this hand a little bit more into the center. So now I want him to look down this hallway at about frame 290. Maybe he hears something, or he's just kind of looking over. So I'm going to select the neck, and I will rotate that over, and then I'm going to select the head on frame 290, and I'll rotate that up. Let's also press Ctrl S to save. So now we can take a look at this. You can see he quickly looks up, and I do want it to be a little bit faster. So let's maybe set it to 180. So I'm going to move that back, move that keyframe back, and then we can select the neck object, and we can select the keyframes and just kind of move that back a little bit. So now he just kind of looks up pretty quickly. Now naturally, if he's going to look up quickly, then his back and his body is going to kind of move up a little bit. So let's do that. So right about here, I'm going to add a keyframe, so about 250. So I'll press R to rotate. We can just rotate that a little bit, and then place that there. And then let's move to about 280, and we're going to rotate his body up so he's kind of looking up quickly. And we could also move the keyframes into each other a little bit if we want to make that movement a bit faster. And then if you select the body object, you can see there's actually not very many keyframes here, and so I want to make the body move around a little bit just to make it a bit more realistic. So as he rotates over here, I'm going to have his body go forward just a little. That would make more sense because he's looking down. Then as he looks up, I want his body to rotate up more, so we're going to move to to about 150, rotate his body up. And then up here, we can even rotate his body up even more so he's looking up even more. And then as he looks down, it would make sense that his body will move down a little bit. So we're going to rotate that down. And then when he looks at his hand at about frame 230, I'll rotate that down even more, just like that. All right, so let's move now to about frame 290. And by 290, I want his body to be fully rotated over, and then we'll just have him drive out of the scene. So I'm going to go to frame 290, and I'm going to select the main controller. Now let's actually move back to about frame 250, because I want to add a keyframe here so that he doesn't start to move until 250. So I'll press R to rotate, and then click to add a keyframe there. So I'm now going to move over to about 290, and I'm going to rotate this, so R to rotate on the Z-axis, and I'm going to rotate that over just like that. And then I don't want his body to rotate until he's already looking up. So I actually want to select this keyframe here, and I'm going to bring it over to about 270. So now he looks up, and then his body moves. And we can also move both of these keyframes over a little bit if he moved over a bit too fast. Let's also select this keyframe here, and I'm going to move it to 300, and that way he turns a little bit slower. All right, now when he turns over, he's now looking this way, so I need to correct his neck and his head. So I'm going to select this object right here, and I'll move to about frame 300 where he stopped moving, and I'm going to rotate this over to correct for that. And then also I can select this object and just rotate it down slightly, and maybe rotate this over a little bit more. So now as he turns, his head is going to stay looking this way. All right, so let's now move to 320, and he's going to start to move forward, and he's going to start to crouch down. So I'm going to press G to grab, and we're going to bring it over on the X-axis, just bring it a little bit over just like that. We're going to also select the body, and we'll go to 320 or maybe 325, and we can rotate that body down so he's kind of rotating down. And then we'll go back to about 300 and rotate his body up a bit. So now his body is kind of rotating down as he starts to go forward. And then I'm going to move all the way over to like 350, and I'm going to select the main controller, and I'll press G to grab. We're going to bring that over on the X-axis, and we'll bring that pretty far so that he starts to move away. And then that's moving a bit too fast, so I'm going to select this end keyframe, and we'll move it out maybe closer to 400, maybe to 370. So he starts to move, but it's not super fast. All right, so now as he rotates down, I want his head to look up a little bit so that he can kind of see where he's going. So I'm going to select the head rotation object, and I'm going to first make his head rotate down a little bit. And then as we move forward more, he's going to look up. So I'm just going to rotate that up. So if we go back here, you can see he kind of looks down, and then he kind of looks up as he moves forward. All right, so that is looking pretty good, but we need to go back and animate the hands because I haven't really been animating the hands since about 250. So when he looks over and he turns, I want the hands to move, and then his hands will kind of move together as he starts to move faster. So let's go to about frame 270, and as he looks over, his hands are going to slouch down more because he's not really thinking too much about his hands. So I'm going to rotate this down. Let's move forward a little bit, and then I can rotate this arm down a little bit, and also we can rotate this down a little bit. And then as he rotates over from about 270 to around 300, as he rotates, his arms are going to kind of move back a little bit or move this way. So I'm going to move to about frame 300, and I'm going to rotate his hands and maybe bring them up a little bit. And then this one here, I'm going to rotate his hand and maybe bring that up a little bit. And then as he starts to crouch down and move, I want to kind of tuck in his arms a little bit. So this is about 320. So I'm going to rotate that up. We'll select this one. We can rotate that up a bit. And then we can also close his hands a little bit and maybe move them up. Something like that. Let's do the same thing over here. So I can kind of rotate this back, and we can select this one. And let's rotate that up a bit. We can also rotate this one up a little bit, and then we can move both of the claws up like that. Let's press 0 to go into the camera view, and then we can see how this is looking. So he kind of moves in there, then he kind of stops, he kind of looks around, then he looks up, looks over, and then he kind of looks down at his hand. That's looking pretty good. And then he looks up, turns around, and then he goes forward. Of course, you can totally pause this video and kind of go back and tweak some things. You can tweak the keyframes and change the timing, and also add in little subtleties, like if you want his claw hands to kind of open and close in little parts, you can totally go back and refine the animation. I'm going to call that good though for the animation, but I do want to animate the camera. So I'm going to click right up here and click on this button, and that's going to unhide the lights and camera. So I now just want to select the camera, and I can press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera. So I now want to rotate the camera around to make it kind of look like a handheld camera, and I also want to make it move to his movements. So I'm first going to go to frame 0, and then I can double tap the R key, and I'm just going to bring the camera over here. And then I'm going to move over to about frame 50, and I'm going to double tap the R key, and then I can hold down the shift key to make my movements more sensitive, and I'm going to rotate this over so that the camera is kind of turning over to look at the robot. So you can see now the camera is looking over. Then as the robot moves more into the center, I'm going to double tap the R key, kind of rotate that over, and I can also hit G to grab, and then I can double tap the Z key, and I'm just going to move the camera in a little bit. So now as he kind of moves into focus, the camera is going to move in a little bit. So now as he looks over this way, I kind of want to have the camera move over this way as well. So I'm going to double tap the R key. We can kind of rotate the camera over, and we can also move it in the 3D space if you want to as well. So you can press G to grab and move it in the 3D space. And then as he looks up here, I want the camera to kind of move out a little bit. So I'll press G to grab. I can double tap the Z key and just kind of move that out. I can also press G to grab and move the camera up a little bit. And then I can double tap the R key and just point it up a little bit. So the camera's almost looking where he's looking. And then he's going to look at his hands. So I'm going to double tap the R key, kind of bring it in, and also bring it in closer. So you can just move the camera in closer. And you can see that now the camera is just looking where he's looking because that is the point of interest. And then as he looks up, I'm going to have the camera look up a bit and also move out a bit. So I'm going to double tap the R key and bring it up so that you can just see a little bit more of the side. And then I can press G to grab, double tap the Z key, and I can bring that out so you can see the entire robot. And also right here, it looks like the claw hand goes into the ground a little bit. So I can just rotate that up and rotate this up as well. Just rotate that up. And then at around frame 300, I can rotate the camera over. So I can double tap the R key, just kind of bring the camera over. And then as he moves out of the frame, I can double tap the R key and just kind of rotate this over. And that way the camera will start to move with him, but he'll still move out of the camera's perspective. And then I want the camera to end at about 375. So on this end frame here, I can type in 375, and that way the animation will end. All right, so let's just go back and take a look at this. So I'm going to go to the starting frame. I can go into the rendered view and let's just see how that's looking. So he moves over and then he kind of looks up, and I do like how the camera kind of follows where he's looking, kind of looks around, and then he looks down, and then he looks over, turns around, and goes out of the scene. All right, so I'm going to call that good for the animation. Now, if you go to about frame 30, I'm going to render this and we're going to see what the motion blur looks like. So here's the motion blur, and you can see the motion blur is pretty strong, and I don't want it to be quite that strong. So to do that, I'm going to click right over here on the render properties. And then I'm going to go right down here, and I'm going to open up the motion blur. And then in the motion blur settings, you can turn the shutter up and down. So if you turn the shutter up, that's going to make the motion blur stronger. But if you turn the shutter down, then it's going to be less strong. So I am going to turn the shutter speed to a 0.35. I think 0.35 looks pretty good. And I just gave this another render, and you can see now the motion blur is definitely not as strong. All right, so now we need to set an output for our images. So I'm going to go right here to the output properties, and on the file format, I'm just going to leave it set to PNG so it renders it out as images. And then let's click on this button right here to set the output. So what I'm going to do is just click on this plus button right here, and that is going to create a new folder. And then I can just rename this folder to rendered frames. And then I'm just going to go inside this folder. And so once I'm inside the folder, then I can just click on the accept button. Now there is one more important thing that I need to do before I render out this as an animation. You can see that when I render this out, the vignette is on this side and this side, but it's not on the top and bottom. And that is because we rendered this out as a square image, so we just need to correct the vignette and then we can render it out. So I'm going to click right over here on the compositing tab, and I'm going to click on the box mask. And then I'm going to press V to zoom out the backdrop. So you can see there's all that extra space there. So on the height, I just need to drag the height value down, and that way we'll just wait for that to load up and composite. And now you can see that that vignette is on the top and bottom as well. All right, so just press Ctrl S again to save, and then you can press Ctrl F12 to render the animation, or you can also click on render and then render the animation. And the render finished. So I'm just going to press Ctrl S to save, and now I need to edit the frames together in Blender's video editor. So I'm going to click on File, and I'm going to to go to new, and then I'm going to click on video editing, and that's going to open up a video editing layout. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go right down here, and I'm going to add image or sequence. And then you just need to locate to the folder where you have all the rendered frames. So I'm just going to press A to make sure everything is selected, select all the frames, and then I can click on Add Image Strip. And then also I want to set the resolution to the correct size. So I rendered out mine to 1080p, so 1920 by 1080, but I set the percentage to 200. So then let's also turn the end frame up. So I'm going to turn the end frame up. Now I know that the end frame is 375. You can see it says 375. So I'm going to take the end frame and I'm going to turn it to 375. And then if you'd like to, you can also add in sound effects and music and things like that. I'll have some links in the video description to the sound effects that I used. So they were free sound effects from a website called freesound.org, but I won't be adding in the sound effects in this tutorial. But if you'd like to, you can download the same sound effects that I used, and then you can just add them into Blender's video editor. So let's now render this out to a finished animation. So I'm going to scroll right down here, and on the output, I need to set an output. So I'm just going to click on this file icon right here. And then I'll just save the finished video in a folder on my computer, and I can click on accept. And then for the name, I'm just going to click right here, and I'm just going to call this final render. And then down here on the file format, I'm going to set the file format to FFmpeg video. And then let's open up the encoding, and I'm going to set the container to MPEG-4. And then right down here under video, I'm going to set the video codec to H.264. And then I will also just leave these at medium quality and good. And then also, if you have any audio in your finished video, then you can change the audio codec. So I like to use the audio codec of AAC, so that is what I'm going to use. So you can just save this file, and then you can just render this out by going render, and then you can render the final animation. And there we have it. So there is the final animation. So this is going to wrap it up for this tutorial series. So this was a very long tutorial series. So if you watched the entire thing, thank you for watching. And I hope you learned a lot through the tutorial series, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And again, if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel, then you can check out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Those are two really great places to help support me and this channel. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in a future tutorial.